A few years ago, a coworker came up to me and asked me a simple question. And I gave him a really simple answer, and I don't think he accepted it. Because he asked me, and this was at a hospice, and me being the chaplain, he said, "Deacon," he says, "when did the Catholics start believing that the bread and wine was the body and blood of Christ?" And I just kind of looked at him because it was a question I wasn't expecting, and I said, "At the Last Supper?" And he just kind of like, "Well, that's not the way I learned it." I said, "But we have to listen to what Jesus says, right?" I said, you always telling me that, this stuff is not in the Bible, that's not in the Bible, but Jesus says, this is my body, this is my blood. I said, how can we take it any other way? And I think he was a little shocked, a little set back, because he didn't expect me to have an answer. And I'm kind of thinking, if you're going to pick on a deacon, why would you not expect an answer, right? I mean, sometimes we're not able to answer questions when people ask us. But this is the basis of our faith. The Catechism says that the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. Everything we do leads us to the Eucharist. And why is that? Because the Eucharist is Jesus Christ. The Eucharist is His body and blood, soul and divinity. Everything is in the Eucharist. Should be everything that we live for is in that Eucharist. In today's gospel, we hear about when Jesus institutes the priesthood. And it seems very simple, and sometimes we don't quite understand what He was doing. But He had picked the 12 to be leaders of the people. And then He got up as master and teacher and washed their feet. Now you see, this is a different time from when they lived back then, right? Because they wore sandals and walked on dirt roads. So you can imagine what their feet looked like. Their feet were always dirty. Because it was just a way of life. In a lot of places, when they would go in, there was a bowl and there was a place to wash your feet when you walked into someone's house, because, that way you didn't bring the dirt all over. So when Jesus took the master and teacher, washed the dirtiest parts of their body, and then He commanded them to do the same. There was a phrase I heard one day that said that the church does not exist for the priest, but the priest exists for the church. You see, we have to understand the relationship of the priest to his people, right? He's the only one that says those words of consecration. He's the only one that can preside over the table. That changes, when it changes that bread and wine into Jesus' body and blood. So within ourselves, we have to know that is the life that we need. Because Jesus says, unless we eat His body and drink His blood, we have no life within us. So I ask you tonight to please pray for our priests. Pray for our seminarians. Pray for those who are discerning the priesthood. Because without the priest, we have no Eucharist. And without the Eucharist, we have no life.